Chapter 1. The Missing 252. By Mara Vey's 11th day at Depot 7, she had heard 3 different explanations for supplies that had apparently arrived without troubling themselves to actually exist. The first had been flour. According to the receiving ledger, 12 sacks had been delivered to the Eastern Field kitchen. According to the cook who had appeared at the records room door shouting loudly enough to make the inkpots nervous, only 8 had reached him. The second had been boots. 40 pairs issued. 29 pairs found on soldiers. The third had been lamp oil, although that complaint had ended abruptly when Senior Clerk Dalka informed the unfortunate corporal that the depot possessed a signed receipt and therefore, from an administrative perspective, the oil had arrived. Mara had thought this an admirably efficient solution to the problem of reality. She had written all 3 incidents in the little notebook she kept tucked inside her uniform jacket, not because anyone had asked her to. Nobody at Depot 7 had yet displayed the slightest interest in asking Second Lieutenant Mara Vey much of anything. At 19, 11 days into her first military posting, and equipped with the imposing rank of second lieutenant, Mara occupied a position in the depot hierarchy, somewhere between the spare ink and the man who sharpened the office pencils. Possibly below the pencils. The pencils were necessary. Mara was still under review. She sat at the end of a long wooden table in the depot records room, copying wagon numbers from one ledger into another while rain drummed steadily against the slate roof. Outside, men shouted over groaning wagon wheels and unhappy horses. Depot 7 had been built where 3 military roads met, which apparently made it strategically indispensable and architecturally exempt from drainage. Mud coated everything. Boots, wagons, dogs. One particularly determined patch of mud had somehow reached the second-floor records room yesterday. Mara had elected not to ask questions. She finished copying wagon 26B, checked the number twice, and moved to the next line. Her class made this sort of work almost insultingly easy. Ledger clerk. She still remembered awakening it the previous year. Everyone in the village had gathered for the annual class ceremony. Her mother had cried. Her father had tried not to. Mara had stood beneath the assessment crystal, wondering whether 18 years in this world, and the inconvenient remnants of another lifetime before it, might finally produce something interesting. The crystal had glowed. The priest had smiled. Ledger clerk. And Mara had thought, congratulations, you are magically better at paperwork. She hadn't said it aloud. Her mother had been standing beside her. There were limits even reincarnation did not encourage a person to test. The class was not entirely useless. Mara could total columns almost without thinking. Once she had read a transaction carefully, remembering it later was easier. Numbers copied by her hand seemed reluctant to transpose themselves, which was more than could be said for several of the clerks sitting around her. Useful abilities. Respectable abilities. Abilities ideally suited to a long and distinguished career of making sure Column C agreed with Column F. Mara had once, in another life, spent 12-hour days dealing with distribution centers, freight schedules, inventory shortages, warehouse managers, emergency deliveries, and spreadsheets constructed by people who regarded formulas as a form of witchcraft. She had died. She had been born again. She had spent 19 years learning to live in a kingdom where actual witchcraft was considerably better documented than warehouse management, and somehow the universe had still put her behind a desk. She was beginning to suspect intent. The records room door slammed against the wall. Every clerk looked up. A man in a rain-darkened officer's coat stood in the doorway, water dripping from his shoulders onto the floor. He was perhaps 30, broad without being particularly large, with the tired expression of someone who had already had a bad morning and was looking for somebody responsible. "Captain Rusk." His voice carried cleanly across the room. Mara stopped writing. At the center desk, Captain Galen Rusk, Depot 7's quartermaster, looked up from his correspondence with considerably less urgency. Rusk was a heavyset man in his late 40s whose uniform always seemed cleaner than the depot deserved. He had served on the frontier longer than Mara had been alive, a fact he had mentioned twice during her first 11 days despite Mara never having asked. "Captain Kyle," Rusk leaned back, "you're dripping on my records. I'll try to arrange for the rain to stop." "That would be appreciated." A few clerks carefully returned their attention to their work. Mara didn't. Captain Joran Kyle crossed the room carrying 2 folded sheets. "My company received its ration shipment this morning." "Then I congratulate you." You may want to wait. Kale dropped one sheet onto Rusk's desk. 1,200 ration bundles were dispatched. Yes, we received 948. The scratching of pens around the room slowed. Mara stared at the ledger in front of her without seeing it. 1,200. 948. She subtracted automatically. 252 missing. 21%. Her attention sharpened. Rusk's expression barely changed. Usable bundles? 948 usable bundles. That isn't quite the same thing as 948 received. My soldiers cannot eat a ration bundle because the depot technically succeeded in delivering the wet remains of it. Unfortunately, Captain, rain remains outside my authority. I filed a request with the weather office. Rusk almost smiled. Kale did not. My company marches north in 2 days. I requisitioned 1,200 because I require 1,200, not 948 and a philosophical discussion about moisture. That earned a brief silence. Mara liked him slightly more. Rusk picked up the receipt. Seal is intact. On the receipt, signed by your field kitchen. Because that is what arrived. And Depot 7's dispatch record shows 1,200 leaving. That, Kale said, is why I'm standing here. Rusk sighed, not guiltily, irritably. Captain, you know how frontier transport works. I know how subtraction works. Mara's mouth twitched. Rusk began counting problems on his fingers. Bad roads, breakage, rain, drivers helping themselves, soldiers helping themselves, contractors packing light, horses going lame, crates being shifted between wagons, half-trained loaders dropping things that were not designed to be dropped. All of which sounds remarkably like a list of things somebody might want to fix, and all of which have existed since before either of us put on a uniform. Kale planted both hands on the desk. 21%. Mara looked up sharply. He had calculated it too. Rusk shrugged. Higher than I'd like. Higher than I'd like is finding a beetle in my soup. This is 1/5 of my food. Which means 4/5 arrived. Mara had heard managers make that argument in another life. Not those exact words. The numbers had been different, the uniforms non-existent, and nobody involved had possessed a sword. The logic, unfortunately, appeared immortal. She glanced at Senior Clerk Dalka. He was studying his ledger with tremendous concentration. Nobody else seemed surprised. That bothered her more than the missing food. 21% could happen. A shipment could be damaged. A vehicle could overturn. Somebody could steal from it. A warehouse could make a disastrous counting error. What should not happen was 21% vanishing and everyone behaving as though the appropriate response was to shrug professionally. Mara's first week here had taught her one thing very quickly. Depot 7 did not have a shortage problem. It had an explanation problem. Whenever something disappeared, everyone had an explanation. Rain, roads, bandits, drivers, soldiers, contractors. The explanation changed. The missing supplies did not. Kale produced the second sheet. This is the dispatch copy my sergeant received when the convoy left yesterday. Rusk took it. Mara could see the markings even from the end of the table. Depot seal, wagon numbers, load totals, 1,200. For 11 days, Mara had heard complaints, but those complaints had always been incomplete. The cook knew how much flour he'd received, but Mara had never seen the original dispatch record. The soldiers knew they didn't have their boots, but there had been 3 transfers between the depot and their unit. The corporal with the lamp oil had possessed nothing except certainty and a very loud voice. This was different. 2 records. One created when the goods left, one when they arrived, both signed, both official. Mara found herself standing. Senior Clerk Dalka looked over. Lieutenant? She hadn't intended to move. Sorry. She sat again and reached for the depot's duplicate dispatch ledger. Yesterday's records. There it was. 1,200 field ration bundles. 3 wagons, dispatch seal confirmed. Across the room, Kale's receipt still lay face up on Rusk's desk. 948 accepted as usable. Her class stirred. Mara froze. Ledger Clerk had never felt like much of anything before. It made columns easier to total, transactions easier to remember, numbers easier to hold in her head. This was different. Something seemed to be waiting just beyond her awareness. 1,200, 948. Her class supplied the answer automatically. 252. Yes, Mara whispered. Dalka glanced toward her. She ignored him, but subtraction wasn't the problem. Everyone in the room could subtract. The paperwork was internally correct. 1,200 had been recorded leaving. 948 had been recorded arriving. Both documents could be accurate while the system itself was wrong. A memory surfaced, fluorescent warehouse lights, a computer screen, and a manager insisting his inventory report balanced. Mara, older then and thoroughly tired of the argument, had asked, "I didn't ask whether the spreadsheet balances. I asked whether it matches what's on the floor." Her pulse quickened. Ledger Clerk had always helped her determine whether records agreed with themselves. She had never asked whether they agreed with reality. Mara rested her hand on the dispatch ledger and looked at Cale's receipt. "Does this," she murmured, "describe what actually happened?" Something opened inside her awareness. For one strange instant, it felt like discovering a door in a wall she had walked past all her life. Then pale lettering appeared, flow detected. Origin, Depot 7. Destination, Third Foot, Field Kitchen. Declared dispatch, 1,200 ration bundles. Verified usable receipt, 948 ration bundles. Variance, minus 252. Loss, 21%. Status, unreconciled. Mara stared at it. The argument on the other side of the room continued without interruption. I enjoy manhwa and manga style of stories, but the quality of a lot of this type of content on YouTube is low quality. So I created this channel and I am creating 100% original stories like this one. I use AI for the narration and images. If you are enjoying the story so far, please comment, like, and subscribe. Now back to the story. Nobody gasped. Nobody pointed at the glowing letters hanging in the middle of Mara's vision. That answered one question. She focused on the missing bundles. Where did they go? Nothing changed. Which wagon lost them? Nothing. Who took them? The pale lettering remained serenely unhelpful. A map would have been nice. A glowing arrow toward the guilty party would have been even nicer. Mara waited another moment. The system apparently considered 252 missing meals sufficient information for one day. Of course it did. Even magical paperwork had assigned her homework. Lieutenant Vey. Mara blinked. Senior Clerk Dalka was looking directly at her now. Yes? You have been staring at Captain Rusk's desk for nearly a minute. Oh, she lowered her eyes to the ledger. Sorry. Dalka waited. Mara had known him for 11 days, which was long enough to recognize the particular silence he used when he did not believe someone but lacked sufficient interest to investigate further. Fortunately, he possessed a great deal of that silence. He returned to room. Captain Cale had reached the end of his patience. I don't care what percentage you consider normal, he said. I need to know whether tomorrow's shipment is going to arrive in the same condition. Rusk rubbed at the bridge of his nose. And I have told you that I cannot guarantee what happens to 3 wagons over 18 miles of frontier road. No, you've told me that things go missing. Yes. What I am asking is why. Rusk spread his hands. Pick one. Mara looked up. Cale did too. Rusk continued. Rain, theft, poor packing, damaged roads, bad horses, worse drivers. If you want me to send someone chasing every lost ration bundle, I'll need another building to hold them. Mara hesitated. Sir? The room became very quiet. Rusk looked at her. Something you'd like to contribute, Lieutenant? There were several correct answers to that question. Most began with no, sir. Unfortunately, Mara now had unreconciled floating faintly at the edge of her vision. Yes, sir. Dalka stopped writing. Mara stood. We have both records. I am aware. The dispatch copy and Captain Cale's receipt. Yes. They agree that there is a difference of 252 usable bundles. Cale looked toward her properly for the first time. Rusk did not look impressed. That is generally how subtraction works. Yes, sir. A dangerous sentence followed. Mara said it anyway. So shouldn't we be able to determine where the difference occurred? Rusk stared at her. Mara had the sudden, vivid impression of every experienced officer who had ever listened to a 19-year-old second lieutenant discover a problem that had existed for several decades. Should, Rusk said at last, is a generous word. Mara kept her expression neutral. Is it impossible? No. Then it is time-consuming. That stopped her. Rusk leaned back. You have been here 11 days, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Do you know how many shipments leave this depot in a week? No, sir. Neither do I without looking it up, which should tell you something. Cale made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Rusk ignored him. If I assign someone to chase every discrepancy, that person stops doing the work already on the schedule. Most discrepancies have extremely dull explanations: a torn sack, an incorrect count, a driver taking something home. We note the loss and move on. Mara glanced at Kale. 21% seems high for moving on. Rusk's eyes narrowed slightly. Not anger, assessment. Based on your extensive experience? There it was. Fair question. Mara could hardly explain that in another life she had once spent 6 weeks helping a distribution center reduce inventory shrinkage by 3 percentage points, and that nobody involved had considered losing a fifth of a shipment charmingly inevitable. Based on the fact that if tomorrow's convoy loses another 21%, Captain Kale's company will be short again. Kale folded his arms. I find her reasoning difficult to fault. Rusk gave him a flat look. Of course you do. Then he turned back to Mara. What exactly are you proposing? Mara opened her mouth. Stopped. That was also a fair question. She did not actually know. The ledger had confirmed a discrepancy. It had not provided an investigation manual. I'd like to compare the loading record, wagon assignments, and any transfer documents against the receipt. And then inspect the wagons if they're still here. 2 are. And speak to the drivers. 1 is asleep. 1 is drunk. Mara considered that. Can I speak to the drunk one? Kale coughed into his fist. Rusk's expression did something complicated. You are taking this remarkably seriously. So is Captain Kale. I have soldiers eating half portions, Kale said. 4/5 portions. Kale looked at him. Rusk sighed. Fine. Mara almost smiled. You may spend the afternoon determining why Captain Kale is missing his precious 252 bundles. Thank you, sir. That was not praise. No, sir. And you will do so without neglecting the records and transport work already assigned to you. Mara's smile vanished. Rusk noticed. Welcome to logistics, Lieutenant. Kale actually laughed this time. The wagon yard behind Depot 7 smelled of wet leather, manure, wood smoke, and several things Mara decided not to identify. 30-some wagons stood in various states of readiness beneath a gray afternoon sky. Some were covered, some were being repaired. One had no left rear wheel. A mule stared at Mara with the exhausted contempt of an animal that had already formed opinions about the army. She understood the feeling. Which one are you looking for? The voice came from beneath a wagon. Mara stopped. A pair of boots protruded from under the chassis. Yesterday's 3rd-foot ration convoy. The boots remained where they were. That narrows it down to 3. I know. Progress already. Something scraped against wood. A man rolled out from beneath the wagon on one shoulder and sat up. He looked somewhere in his late 40s, though Frontier Service had apparently been negotiating with his face for years. His hair was more gray than brown. His uniform bore staff sergeant stripes and enough mud to suggest he had earned each stain personally. He looked Mara over. New lieutenant. 2nd Lieutenant Mara Vey. Staff Sergeant Bren Kest. I was told 2 of the wagons from yesterday's convoy were back. They are. Can you show me? Can. He did not move. Mara waited. Bren looked toward the records building. Rusk send you. He gave permission. Different answer. Mara considered lying. Her ledger clerk class did not, unfortunately, provide a talent for convincing veteran oncos that nonsense was true. Captain Kale complained about missing rations. I asked to look into it. Bren's mouth shifted by perhaps half a millimeter. You volunteered. Yes. Why? 252 bundles are missing. That happens. Apparently. He studied her for another moment, then pushed himself upright. Come on, Lieutenant. Mara followed him between the wagons. The first was a heavy 4-wheel freight wagon with a canvas cover stretched across wooden bows. Bren slapped the side. 16. Mara looked at the painted number. It's marked 23. Wagon 23. 16 was its position in yesterday's train. Oh, Bren looked at her. 11 days? Mara frowned. How did you know that? Because on day 12, you stop assuming wagon numbers and convoy positions are the same thing. He moved on. Mara added that to a growing list of facts, the depot had apparently planned to let her learn through humiliation. Bren pointed to another wagon with a newer canvas top. 31 was second, still out. 23 was third. First wagon came back this morning. And how much can each carry? Depends. On? The wagon, the horses, the road, weather, driver, cargo? Mara waited. Bren looked at her. That answer bothers officers. It bothers anyone hoping for a number. 3,000 pounds. Mara brightened. Approximately. Her expression fell again. Bren's mouth twitched. 3,000 on decent ground with a good team and no idiot loading it. Less on the northern road this week. How much less? 500. That much? Maybe 7. Mara frowned and looked at the wagon. The depot loading record listed each wagon just under its official rated capacity. If the record says they were carrying 2,900 pounds, they weren't. Mara looked at him. You know that without seeing the load? I know the road. He crouched beside the rear wheel and pointed at a crack in the dried mud packed around the rim. North Road climbs hard after Gray Creek. 2 days of rain. Take 2,900 up there, and you'll either lighten the wagon or kill the team. The manifest says, the manifest isn't pulling the wagon. Mara stopped. That landed harder than she expected. In another life, she had seen exactly the same mistake with different machinery. Someone had taken a manufacturer's capacity, entered it into a planning model, and quietly assumed the real world had agreed. It rarely did. What would you load? 2,200, 24 if the road dries. Mara looked back at the records building. That means the official carrying capacity isn't the useful carrying capacity. Bren gave her a long look. No. There was a pause. Did nobody explain this to the new officers? They may have. And? I've been here 11 days. Ah. Apparently that explained a great deal. Mara walked around the wagon. Several lengths of cut cord lay in the mud near the back. She crouched. Are these from the seals? Bren glanced down. Canvas ties. Why are they cut? Because untying frozen wet knots is an excellent hobby for people with no pressing obligations. Mara picked one up. The end was cleanly sliced. So the cover was opened? Of course. During the trip? Almost certainly. Why? Bren shrugged. Could have checked the load, could have shifted weight, could have stolen something, could have replaced a broken strap. Mara looked at the cord. 4 explanations, all plausible. The ledger remained silent. Good. She was beginning to understand the arrangement. It would tell her that reality and the record had separated. Reality, inconveniently, still required investigation. Where are the ration crates? Empty ones? If there are any. Bren led her to a covered storage lean-to beside the yard. Several broken wooden crates had been stacked for reuse. Mara found the 3rd foot markings quickly. She lifted one. Lighter than expected, though being empty made that observation somewhat useless. Were all the ration bundles packed in identical crates? Supposed to be. How many per crate? 25. Mara looked through the stack. Most were roughly the same size. One was not. It was perhaps 4 inches shallower than the others. She pulled it free. Was this part of yesterday's shipment? Bren crouched beside her. 3rd foot's faded destination mark remained visible beneath a smear of mud. Yes. Mara ran her fingers along the inside. The dividers had spaces for 20 bundles. Not 25. She looked at Bren. He looked at the crate. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Bren said, That's interesting. Mara found another. Also 20. Then a 3rd. 25. A 4th. 20. She felt the familiar click of a problem changing shape. The manifest recorded crates. The kitchen had counted usable ration bundles. If someone had packed smaller crates but recorded them as full size. How many crates went out yesterday? Bren scratched his jaw. 48. Mara did the calculation. 48 full crates at 25 each. 1,200 ration bundles. Exactly. She looked at the smaller box. If even some of those crates held 20 instead of 25, then part of the loss happened before the wagons ever left the depot. Bren's eyes shifted toward her. Maybe. You don't sound convinced. I've learned to dislike explanations that arrive before the evidence. Mara looked back at the mismatched crates. Fair. Where are these packed? Contractor warehouse on the south side. Not here? No. Does Depot 7 verify the contents? We verify the crate count. Mara stared at him. Not what is inside them? They're sealed when they arrive. By the contractor. Yes. And then we record 48 sealed crates as 1,200 rations because the contractor says each contains 25. Bren tilted his head. When you say it like that, it sounds questionable. How else would you say it? Efficient. Mara laughed despite herself, then stopped. The pale interface at the edge of her awareness flickered. Not a new answer, not a culprit, just the same stubborn statement. Variance, minus 252. Status, unreconciled. Mara looked again at the stack of crates. She had come outside expecting to find missing food. Instead, within 20 minutes, she'd learned that wagon capacity was not what the paperwork claimed. The load had been opened on the road, and at least some supposedly identical ration crates were not identical at all. 252 missing bundles had seemed like one problem. It was beginning to look like several. Bren stood. You still want to spend your afternoon on this? Mara put the smaller crate beside the standard one. More than I did 20 minutes ago. That earned the first unmistakable smile she had seen from him. It was not especially reassuring. Then you'd better meet the driver. The drunk one? The drunk one, Mara sighed. Excellent. Bren started toward the stable yard. Welcome to logistics, Lieutenant. That joke was funnier the first time. I wasn't joking. Bren found the driver behind the stable. He was sitting on an overturned feed bucket with his back against the wall, hat pulled low over his eyes and a dented tin cup resting between both hands. Mara smelled the contents before they reached him. Drunk? She murmured. Not very. The driver lifted one finger without opening his eyes. Off duty. Bren nodded toward him. Tomas Reed. Sergeant. Tomas. The man opened one eye. Lieutenant wants to ask about yesterday's third-foot convoy. The eye closed again. Tell the lieutenant it rained. I noticed. Both eyes opened. Tomas looked at Mara, then at Bren. This one talks? Frequently. I've been here 11 days. That explains it. Mara was beginning to suspect the depot issued that answer along with uniforms. She crouched so she wasn't speaking down to him. I'm trying to account for 252 missing ration bundles. Tomas took a drink. You won't. That is an encouraging start. Didn't say you shouldn't try. Good, let's try. He sighed and set the cup beside him. What do you want to know, Lieutenant? Start when you receive the wagons. South Contractor Yard, before dawn. The ration crates were already packed and sealed. Did you check them? Counted them. 48? 48. Mara glanced at Bren. That matched. Did you weigh them? Tomas laughed. No. Why not? Because it was raining, it was dark, there were 6 other wagons waiting behind us, and the contractor's yardmaster had a seal saying 48 crates meant 1,200 rations. So nobody verifies the actual contents. The kitchen does. At the other end. That is usually where people discover they've been cheated. Mara made a note. Did anything happen before you left? During the trip? Yes. How many things? Thomas considered. Depends how annoyingly thorough you're planning to be. Very. Thought so. He held up one finger. Captain Harrow's aide stopped us at mile 6. Mara paused. Stopped a military ration convoy? Had papers. For what? 3 crates. 75 bundles. If you say so. My class is finally earning its keep. Thomas looked at her curiously but continued. Officers mess at North Watch. Dinner for visiting staff. Bren's expression hardened slightly. Those rations were assigned to third foot. I told the aide. And? He showed me a Quartermaster diversion seal. Mara wrote, 3 crates, 75 bundles, diverted. Who authorized it? Paper said Quartermaster office. Captain Rusk? Didn't say Rusk. Do you have the form? Turned it in. That meant records room. Good. What else? Tomas raised a second finger. Canvas split before Gray Creek. The ties we found? Those were from opening the rear cover. Wind got underneath it. We had to cut everything loose and retie. Did the rations get wet? Some. No idea. Were any crates damaged? 2 broke. Several others got soaked along one side. That could explain some of the unusable receipt. Mara wrote it down. Third finger. Wagon 31 cracked an axle half a mile past Gray Creek. Bren's head came up. You didn't report an axle break. Crack, not break. You kept driving it? I kept driving it to the transfer point. Which transfer point? Old Toll House. Bren stared at him. There hasn't been an authorized transfer station at the old toll house in 3 years. Tomas blinked. There was yesterday. Mara stopped writing. Who told you to transfer there? Contractor runner met us on the road. Had a depot transfer chit. How much cargo? 6 crates off 31. 3 went on to 23 to lighten the damaged wagon. 3 went on to a contractor wagon heading north. Mara looked at Bren. Why would army rations be transferred onto a private contractor wagon? Overflow capacity, Tomas said. Happens. Does it? Bren's voice had changed. Tomas looked between them. Apparently not in the way I thought. Did you see the contractor wagon number? 72. Driver? Didn't know him. Destination? Same as ours. Did those 3 crates arrive? Tomas gave her a look. I assume you're asking because they didn't. 3 crates, another 75 bundles. Mara wrote the number beneath the first. 75 diverted, 75 transferred, 150 explained potentially. Tomas raised a 4th finger. Then the road turned into soup. Mara looked at Bren. Is that a technical term? Official frontier classification. They spent another 10 minutes reconstructing the rest of the route. No bandit attack. No overturned wagon. No mysterious disappearance into the forest. 2 wagons had reached 3rd foot normally. The cracked wagon arrived late after being repaired enough to limp forward. The kitchens had opened every crate and rejected anything soaked badly enough to be unsafe. How much did they reject? Mara asked. Tomas shrugged. Ask the cooks. She intended to. Then she noticed something. The 3 crates transferred to the contractor wagon. Yes. Who signed them out of your custody? Tomas frowned. The transfer chit. No, who signed? He thought. Contractor runner. Name? Don't remember. Was there a receiving seal? Yes. Army seal? Pause. I assumed it was. Bren exhaled through his nose. Mara closed her notebook. Thank you. Tomas picked up his cup again. Did I help? Possibly. That sounds like officer for no. It means I don't know yet. He nodded approvingly. Better answer. Private First Class Pel Anwar was exactly where Mara had left him. He sat at the far end of the records room beneath a shelf of requisition books, shoulders slightly hunched, carefully repairing the binding on a ledger that looked older than everyone in the building. Mara put the diversion form on his desk. Pel, do you know what this is? He looked at it. Yes, Lieutenant. She waited. He continued repairing the ledger. Mara tried again. Could you tell me? Oh, he adjusted his spectacles. Field diversion authorization. Supplemental Form 12C. Valid. Pel looked at the seal. No. Mara stared at him. You answered that very quickly. It is the wrong seal. She pulled out the chair beside him. Explain. Pel seemed surprised anyone wanted him to. He pointed to the stamped crest near the bottom. This is a general Quartermaster reassignment seal. It allows unallocated stores to be reassigned between depot destinations. These were already allocated. Yes, Lieutenant. To 3rd foot, yes. So what would be required? Emergency Field Diversion Authorization, 12E. Different seal, red border. Mara looked at the black border on the document. And without that, the cargo should not have been removed, even for an officer. Especially for an officer. She looked at him. Pel cleared his throat. Otherwise, every officer with a general requisition seal could simply remove field supplies whenever he wanted. That would seem inconvenient. It was. Was? The regulation exists because General Orden apparently diverted 6 wagons of winter coal to heat his estate during the frost campaign. Mara blinked. When? 117 years ago. You know this from memory? Yes. Why? Pel's expression suggested the question itself was strange. It is in the annotation. Mara had spent 11 days thinking Pel was a nervous young private whose primary military function was keeping quills organized. She reconsidered. Can you tell when this form was entered? Pel turned it over. Yesterday evening. The diversion happened yesterday morning. Yes. Does that matter? It matters if somebody wants the records to appear as though the diversion had been approved before the convoy departed. Mara leaned closer. The authorization date at the top showed yesterday morning. The filing mark at the bottom showed yesterday evening. Backdated. Can that happen legitimately? Yes. Mara deflated slightly. Pel continued. But then there should be a provisional field authorization attached. She brightened again. Is there? No. Could it be elsewhere? Yes. Is that likely? No. Mara smiled. Pel looked alarmed. What? Nothing. You're smiling. I've just discovered you're extremely useful. He stared at her. After a moment, he said, I was already useful, Lieutenant. Mara stopped. There it was. Not offended, just factual, and entirely deserved. Yes, she said. You were. Pell went back to the document. Mara thought about how little attention she had paid him during her first week. Too quiet, too nervous. Private first class, no obvious authority. She had sorted him into a category and moved on, which was, she realized with some discomfort, precisely what half the depot had done to her. Lesson received. What about this? She handed him the transfer chit from the old toll house. Pell's eyebrows drew together. This station code is obsolete. Bren said the same. It was retired after the new Gray Creek Depot opened. Could somebody still use old forms? Of course. Would that make the transfer legal? No. Mara was beginning to enjoy asking Pell questions. Anything else? He inspected the receiving seal. Then he frowned harder. This isn't Depot 7's contractor seal. Can you tell whose it is? No. Can anyone? The contracts office might. When does it open? Pell glanced toward the window. Tomorrow. Naturally. Mara collected the papers. Thank you. Pell hesitated. Lieutenant? Yes? If you're investigating the missing rations, I am. Senior Clerk Dalka has the rejected goods tally from Third Foot. Mara stopped. He does? It came with the morning packet. Why didn't anyone mention that? Pell looked genuinely puzzled. You didn't ask? Mara closed her eyes briefly. Of course. The tally accounted for 42 unusable ration bundles. Water damage. That left Mara with 3 solid categories. 75 improperly diverted, 42 spoiled in transit, 75 transferred onto a contractor wagon and never received, 192, 60 still missing. She returned to the wagon yard with Pell and found Bren beside the mismatched crates. I need 12 of those smaller boxes. Bren looked at her. There aren't 12 here. How many? 7. We're more broken down for firewood or reuse. Probably. Can we find the packing records? Contractor warehouse keeps them. Mara rubbed her forehead. Tomorrow. Bren nodded toward Pell. You collect clerks now, Lieutenant? Pell stiffened. Mara said, This one knows things. I would hope so. Pell looked uncertain whether he'd been complimented. They measured the smaller crate properly. 20 ration slots instead of 25. 5 missing per crate. Mara compared the contractor's crate dimensions against a supply catalog Pell had brought from the records room. 2 approved ration crate sizes existed. The smaller one was intended for 20 bundles, the larger for 25. The contractor's dispatch record listed all 48 as large. Mara stared at the page. If 12 small crates were recorded as large. 60 bundles, Pell said immediately. Bren glanced at him. Pell lowered his voice. 5 each, I gathered. Oh, Mara added it, 60 short packed, then totaled the 4 categories, 75, 42, 75, 60, 252. She checked again, then a third time. The number did not change. For a few seconds, she simply stood there. The original discrepancy had looked almost absurdly simple. 1,200 left, 948 arrived, 252 missing. One problem. Except there had never been one problem. There had been 4. Cargo had been underpacked before it left. An officer had diverted 3 crates with improper paperwork. 42 bundles had been ruined because the load wasn't adequately protected. 3 crates had disappeared through a suspicious transfer using an obsolete station code and an unrecognized contractor seal. 4 entirely different failures had produced one number. Mara felt the ledger stir. The pale display returned. Declared dispatch. 1,200. Verified usable receipt. 948. Variance. Minus 252. And beneath it, for the first time, variance classified. 252 out of 252. Status unreconciled. Mara stared. That's rude. Bren looked at her. What? Nothing. The system knew she had identified the entire loss and still considered the flow unreconciled. She thought about the officer's 75 ration bundles. They could recover those, perhaps. The contractor theft could be investigated. Someone could be charged. The 42 spoiled bundles were gone. The 60 bundles that had never been packed probably hadn't existed in Army hands in the first place. But tomorrow another shipment would leave. 48 more crates, 3 more wagons, the same seals, the same forms, the same transfer procedures, perhaps different rain, Perhaps a different officer, perhaps a different thief. Mara looked at the stack of mismatched ration crates. Finding the 252 had felt like solving the problem. It wasn't. She could spend tomorrow chasing Captain Harrow's kitchen, the day after hunting down contractor wagon 72, and the following week arguing with the packing yard about crate sizes. Then another shipment would lose another 100 bundles for 3 completely new reasons. She had been thinking about inventory. The problem was the process. Bren, if we recovered all 75 bundles from the officer's mess, would tomorrow's convoy be any less likely to lose food? No. If we arrested whoever took the contractor crates? Depends whether he was the only thief on the frontier. I'm going to assume not. Safe assumption. Mara looked at Pell. If we corrected yesterday's paperwork? Yesterday's paperwork would be correct. And tomorrow? Pell considered. It would depend on tomorrow's paperwork. Exactly. Mara slowly smiled. Bren noticed. That expression usually means more work for someone. Probably several someones. I preferred you when you were looking for missing boxes. So did I. She turned back toward the records building. The ledger followed at the edge of her awareness. Status, unreconciled. For the first time, Mara understood what it was asking. Not, where did the 252 go? She had answered that. The question was, what are you going to change so there aren't another 252 tomorrow? That was a much more interesting problem. Mara spent the next hour discovering that fixing a process was considerably more difficult than identifying that one was broken. The first problem was that everyone involved already had a process. The contractor packed the ration crates. Depot clerks counted the crates. Wagon crews signed for them. Drivers carried them north. Any transfer along the route produced another form. The field kitchen counted what arrived. Every step had paperwork. Quite a lot of paperwork, in fact. That was not the same thing as control. Mara sat at the end of the records table with yesterday's documents spread around her. Pell occupied the chair beside her. Bren had declined a chair entirely and was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like a man who expected clerical theory to become dangerous if left unattended. Mara tapped the contractor manifest. First problem. We count sealed crates, but we don't verify what's inside them. Correct, Pell said. So tomorrow we open every crate. Bren shook his head. No. Mara looked at him. Why? Because tomorrow there'll be another 48 crates. Day after that, maybe 60. Other units have their own shipments. Break every seal, count every ration, repack every crate, and you'll still be loading at midnight. Mara paused. That sounded annoyingly plausible. We could weigh them. Bren's expression changed slightly. Not approval, less disapproval. Faster. Pell looked from one to the other. Would that work? If the ration bundles are standardized, Mara said. 25 bundles should have a predictable weight. 20 should weigh less. Bren nodded. Unless the contractor fills the missing weight with rocks. Pell stared at him. Would they? No idea. Mara rubbed her forehead. Thank you for improving my opinion of people. Happy to help. She wrote, verify crate weight at receipt. Random physical count, not every crate, a sample. If the weights were right, most could pass through quickly. If a crate failed, they opened it. If enough failed, they opened the whole shipment. That was how she would have handled it in her previous life. Not because sampling was perfect, because perfect inspection was rarely free. She looked at the next problem. Diversions. Pell immediately pulled 3 regulation books closer. Mara held up a hand. I don't want another form unless we need one. Pell looked faintly wounded. We may need one. Then we'll earn it. Bren made a noise that might have been a cough. Mara ignored him. The problem wasn't that the diversion went undocumented. It was documented very thoroughly. It was simply unauthorized. Pell nodded. So whoever controls the handoff needs to know the difference between a valid diversion and one that merely looks official. Drivers aren't going to memorize seal regulations, Bren said. No, Mara pointed at Pell. He doesn't need them to. Pell blinked. I don't? No, we need something the driver can verify in 3 seconds. Pell looked down at the documents. The emergency diversion seal has a red border. Yes. And the general reassignment seal does not. Mara nodded. So the instruction becomes, once cargo has been assigned to a field unit, no diversion without a red border seal. Pell frowned. There are exceptions. Of course there are. There's also a battlefield command override, but that requires... Does it have a red border? No. Can a wagon driver reasonably distinguish it? Pell thought. Yes, it is triangular. Good. Red border or triangular command seal. He still looked uncomfortable. That is a simplification. It is. Regulations should not be simplified inaccurately. Is it inaccurate? Pell hesitated. No. Then we've converted 30 pages into something Thomas can use while standing in the rain. Bren said, he'll appreciate that. Pell looked unconvinced. Mara suspected simplicity offended him on aesthetic grounds. She moved to the third problem. Transfers. That one was worse. A legitimate transfer could occur for dozens of reasons. Broken wagon, lame horse, road closure, load balancing, medical priority. Mara could not simply forbid them. If we require the receiving wagon number, driver name and seal at every transfer. Already required, Pell said. Mara stopped. Then how did 3 crates disappear? Pell pushed yesterday's form toward her. Because nobody checked whether the station code was current or whether the receiving seal belonged to an active contractor. Mara stared at it. So all the information needed to stop the theft was already on the form? Yes. And nobody checked it? Yes. Why? Pell looked toward Dalka's desk. Mara lowered her voice. Why? Because the receiving clerk checks whether the form is complete. That isn't what I asked. Pell looked uncomfortable. Because verifying every station code and contractor seal would take too long. There it was again. The system had rules. The problem was that following all of them manually required more time than the organization possessed, which meant the organization had quietly stopped following them. Mara knew that pattern very well. Can we make a current list? Pell blinked. Of what? Authorized transfer stations and active contractor seals. Yes. How many? Transfer stations? 7 in this district. And contractors? 12. Mara stared at him. That is not a difficult list. No? Does one exist? Yes. Of course it does. In the contracts office. Of course it does. Bren's mouth twitched. Mara pointed at Pell. Get a copy. The contracts office is closed. Tomorrow morning, he nodded. Post it where the receiving clerks and convoy sergeants can see it. Bren said, now you're making sense. I'm delighted to have reached the threshold. You're getting there. The last major cause was spoilage. Mara looked at Bren. What would have prevented the 42 ruined bundles? Better canvas? That simple? No, naturally. Better canvas, proper tie-downs, not stacking damaged crates against the outer wall, driver checking the cover after the ridge, and not using 3 different sizes of rope because the quartermaster bought whatever was cheapest that month. That last one sounds oddly specific. It is. Mara added all of it. By the time she finished, the page looked respectable, which immediately made her suspicious. Plans always looked most competent before reality encountered them. She read the process aloud. Contractor deliveries get weighed before acceptance. Random crates opened and physically counted. Allocated field cargo can only be diverted with one of 2 recognizable authorizations. Every transfer records wagon, driver, and seal checked against a current list. Loading crews record cargo condition at dispatch. Receiving units record usable condition on arrival. Pell nodded slowly. Bren did not. Mara looked at him. What? You missed who does what? She looked back at the page. It says what needs doing. That wasn't my question. Mara exhaled. Right. A process without ownership was merely a list of hopes. Loading clerk verifies contractor weights. Pell said. Which loading clerk? Whoever is assigned. That changes daily. Then the shift lead signs responsibility. Pell nodded. Convoy sergeant verifies seals and transfers, Mara continued. Bren raised an eyebrow. You've promoted me to paperwork. Congratulations. I'd rather be demoted. Receiving clerk records, usable quantity and condition. Pell added, named receiving clerk. Named receiving clerk. Mara wrote it down, then stopped. What am I missing now? Bren looked pleased that she had asked. Time. The next morning, Mara stood in the loading yard with what she considered a modest procedural improvement and what everyone else apparently considered a declaration of war. 48 ration crates waited beneath a loading awning. The contractor's yardmaster stood beside them with both hands planted on his hips. You want to weigh all of them? Eventually. We already weighed the shipment. Where? At our warehouse. On your scale? Yes. With your staff? Yes. Recording your numbers? His expression hardened. Are you accusing me of fraud, Lieutenant? Not yet. Bren turned away. Mara suspected he was hiding a smile. The yardmaster was a narrow man named Edrin Vale, dressed better than anyone who worked near wagons had a practical reason to be. He pointed at the depot scale. You'll hold the entire yard. Mara looked behind him. 3 more wagons were already waiting. He had a point. She had planned to weigh each crate individually. That plan survived approximately 40 seconds. All right, she said. 6. Vale blinked. What? We randomly select 6 crates. If all 6 fall within tolerance, the shipment moves. If 1 fails, we test 6 more. If 2 fail, we inspect the shipment. Pell, standing beside her with a clipboard, said quietly, What tolerance, Lieutenant? Mara looked at him. Good question. 2%. Bren immediately said, too tight. Mara looked at him. These are standardized rations. Crates aren't. The boxes vary that much. Wood is wood. Vale said 3%. Bren shook his head. 5? Mara frowned. 5% weight variance could conceal an entire missing ration bundle. Then don't use weight to prove the exact count, Bren said. Use it to find crates suspicious enough to open. That distinction mattered. Mara adjusted again. 5% weight tolerance. Anything outside gets opened and counted. Vale spread his hands. Fine. Pell marked it down. Mara selected the samples herself, not the 6 nearest her. 6 distributed across the load. The first passed, second passed, third was light. Vale's expression tightened. Open it. The contractor worker hesitated. Mara looked at him. Please. The seal broke. Inside were 20 ration bundles. The crate was marked as 25. Silence settled over the loading bay. Mara looked at Vale. He looked at the crate. Bren looked at Mara. 6 more? Mara nodded. 6 more. 2 of those failed. They opened the entire shipment, 9 undersized crates, 45 missing ration bundles, before the army had accepted a single one. Vale became progressively more offended as the count continued, which Mara found interesting because the missing food was not technically his personal property. This is a packing error. 9 times? My staff used 2 crate types. I noticed. You're implying intent. No, Mara said. I'm establishing quantity. That shut him up for several seconds. Pell quietly wrote 1,155 verified bundles beside the contractor's declared 1,200. Mara felt something shift at the edge of her awareness. The ledger appeared, flow, contractor yard to depot 7, declared 1,200, verified 1,155, variance, -45, status, unreconciled. A second flow. Mara's pulse quickened. So reconciliation was not confined to the route she had first examined. Any verified movement might qualify, provided she had access to both states. That was useful, potentially extremely useful. It was also the sort of realization that could wait until 48 crates were loaded. Do we reject the shipment? Pell asked. Mara looked at Vale. He was already speaking to one of his workers in a low, furious voice. Rejecting it would mean Third Foot received nothing until a replacement cargo arrived. Accepting it as 1,200 would recreate the original lie. We accept 1,155. Vale turned sharply. My contract is for 1,200. Then provide 45 more. That will take time. So will explaining why the army paid for food it didn't receive. He stared at her. Bren said, I'd choose the food. Vale did. The convoy should have departed 20 minutes later. It left 53 minutes later. Mara stood in the yard watching it disappear through the gate and trying not to look defeated. Bren did not assist. You're thinking about the delay? Yes. Good. I thought you were going to tell me it was acceptable. It wasn't. Mara looked at him. We found 45 missing bundles and held 5 wagons, 17 horses, 11 loaders, and 3 other shipments while we did it. She folded her arms. So what would you do? Not inspect the entire load in the departure yard. Then where? At contractor receipt. Mara frowned. That is the departure yard. No, you're checking them after the army has already scheduled the convoy. Check contractor deliveries when they enter depot inventory, not when a field shipment is trying to leave. Mara closed her eyes. Obvious, painfully obvious. She had placed quality control at the worst possible bottleneck. Right. Bren nodded. Also, make the contractor correct bad crates before they enter stock. Right. And don't have one officer weigh 6 crates individually if the platform scale can weigh an entire pallet. Mara opened her eyes. We have a platform scale? He pointed. 20 yards away stood a large iron scale she had apparently walked past 4 times. Mara stared at it. Bren waited. This has been educational. It usually is. She pulled out her notebook. The first version of her process had lasted less than an hour. That was fine. Annoying, but fine. A system that failed cheaply in the yard was preferable to one that failed 18 miles away. She crossed out 3 lines, moved inspection upstream, changed individual crate weighing to pallet sampling, assigned contractor corrections before Army acceptance, then looked at the convoy disappearing down the road. Do you think they'll make it under 5%? Bren shrugged. Maybe. Mara glanced at him. That's comforting. You want comforting, ask a priest. The answer arrived shortly before sunset. Captain Kale returned to Depot 7 carrying the receipt himself. This time he was not angry. Mara decided that was promising. Rusk was present when he entered. So was Pell. Bren had wandered into the records room for reasons he declined to explain. Kale placed the sheet on the desk. 1155 dispatched. Mara leaned forward. Usable received? 1111. Pell was faster than she was. 44 lost. Mara calculated the percentage. 3.81%, below 5. The ledger appeared before she consciously summoned it. Flow, Depot 7 to 3rd Foot Field Kitchen. Verified dispatch, 1,155. Verified usable receipt, 1,111. Variance, minus 44. Loss, 3.81%. Target tolerance, 5% or less. For one hopeful second, Mara expected something triumphant. Instead, another line appeared. Qualifying cycle, 1 of 3. Mara stared. Naturally. Rusk was reading the receipt. 1 convoy. Yes, sir, in better weather. Mara looked toward the window. It had rained for most of the afternoon. Rusk corrected himself. In less terrible weather. Kale smiled. My men received 44 fewer rations than expected. Mara looked at him. That isn't normally a sentence people smile while saying. Yesterday they were short 252. Fair. Rusk handed the receipt back. Do it twice more. Mara blinked. Sir? If you want to prove you improved anything, do it twice more. The ledger still floated at the edge of her vision. 1 of 3. Mara looked from it to Rusk. Interesting. For once, the magic and the quartermaster agreed. I intend to. Rusk gave her a long look. Something had changed there. Not respect. Not yet. But he had stopped treating her as amusing. Mara found that considerably more satisfying than she probably should have. The second convoy nearly failed before it left. Not because of packing. Not because of weather. Because the lieutenant arrived with a black-bordered reassignment seal and requested 4 crates for an officer's planning dinner at Northwatch. The driver looked at the seal, then at the small instruction card Pell had tied inside the wagon box. The card read, Field Allocated Cargo. Diversion requires a red border emergency seal or a triangular battlefield command seal. The lieutenant's seal was neither. I have authorization. The driver scratched his jaw. Not the right one, sir. The lieutenant stared at him. I am Lieutenant Cyril. Yes, sir. And you are? Tomas Reed. Mara watched from 20 feet away. She had not told Tomas what to say. She had not even known the lieutenant was coming. Cyril's voice hardened. You will release 4 crates. No, sir. On whose authority? Tomas pointed toward the card. Apparently regulations. The lieutenant looked as though regulations had committed a personal betrayal. Then Pell stepped forward. Not Mara. Pell. He had the relevant book already open. Sir, if the cargo had not yet been assigned to an active field requisition, your seal would be sufficient. Once allocated, Article 23 requires. Cyril looked at Mara. Is this your procedure, Lieutenant? Mara considered the question. Mostly his. She nodded toward Pell. Pell looked startled. The lieutenant's attention shifted. Pell swallowed, then continued anyway. Article 23 requires either an emergency field diversion or battlefield command override, sir. Cyril took the book. Read it. His face tightened. He handed it back. I'll obtain the correct authorization. Of course, sir. He left without the food. Pell exhaled. Mara smiled at him. Well done. I thought he was going to have me flogged. Can he? I don't think so. That is a sentence I would prefer you confirm. Pell nodded seriously. I will. Mara laughed. Then the significance hit her. She had not caught the invalid diversion. Tomas had. Pell had defended it. The process had worked while Mara stood 20 feet away doing nothing. The ledger flickered. Not a notification, just enough to remind her it was there. Mara looked at the convoy. That might be more important than the percentage. The second shipment arrived at 4.6% loss, messier than the first, still within tolerance. Qualifying cycle, 2 of 3. The third left 2 days later under skies dark enough to make Mara suspicious of every cloud. She inspected nothing personally. That required considerably more self-discipline than she cared to admit. Pell handled the documentation. Bren supervised loading. Tomas verified seals. A different clerk confirmed contractor receipt weights. Mara remained in the records room and did her actual assigned work, mostly. She checked the clock 17 times. Dalka noticed on the 9th. If staring at it improved wagon speed, he said, the army would issue clocks to every quartermaster. Mara looked at him. That may be the longest sentence you've said to me. I regret it already. The receipt arrived after dark. Mara heard the boots in the corridor and stood before the door opened. Bren entered, mud up to his knees, wet through, holding a folded sheet. Mara looked at his face. Well? He handed it to her. Verified dispatch, 1,200. Usable receipt, 1,166. 34 lost. Mara barely needed the calculation. 2.83%. The ledger opened. Qualifying cycle, 3 of 3. Then the display changed. For the first time since reconciliation awakened, the word that had followed her for days disappeared. Flow reconciled. Mara read it twice. Then something else unfolded beneath it. Stable corrective process detected. Direct operator intervention not required. Ledger span increased. She went still. Bren was watching her. You look like someone just promoted you. I'm not sure. That sounds inconvenient. You have no idea. But Mara was smiling, not because a magical interface had congratulated her, though she wasn't above appreciating it, because the sentence that mattered most wasn't ledger span increased. It was direct operator intervention not required. Pell had caught the diversion. Bren had adjusted the loading. Tomas had followed the handoff rules. Another clerk had checked the contractor. The system worked when Mara wasn't touching it. That was what fixed meant. Across the room, Russ looked up from his desk. Something amusing, Lieutenant. Mara folded the receipt. No, sir. Rusk looked unconvinced. She sat down. Her ledger felt different now, larger somehow. She turned her attention toward Depot 7's transportation records. Lines that had previously felt like isolated entries began resolving into relationships. Wagons, assignments, routes, availability. For a few seconds, Mara simply watched the network take shape. Then she frowned. Depot 7's master register listed. Serviceable freight wagons assigned, 47. Mara read it again, 47. She had spent enough time in the main wagon yard to know she had not seen anything close to 47 freight wagons there. She stood. Dalka looked up. Lieutenant? Mara barely heard him. She walked to the window overlooking the main yard. Counted. Then counted again. 31 freight wagons in view. The record said 47 serviceable entries assigned to Depot 7. Mara looked back at the ledger. For the first time, the missing rations felt small. Declared serviceable inventory, 47 wagons. Observed in main yard, 31 wagons. Unaccounted register entries, 16. Status, unreconciled. Mara stared at the number. Behind her, Bren said, Problem? She looked over her shoulder. Possibly. How bad? Mara looked back at the yard. Do we have 47 serviceable freight wagons assigned to this depot? Bren's expression changed, slowly. On paper, yes. Then yes. Mara waited. Bren sighed. You're going to ask where the other 16 entries went. I was. He looked toward Rusk's office, then back at Mara. That, he said, is a considerably more interesting question. Mara smiled despite herself. She was beginning to agree.